The widow stood pressed against the plank wall of the community hall, watching the bride whirl past in a froth of ivory muslin, and felt her own body turn to stone. Ophelia Morgan had buried her husband 3 years ago, but the grief had long since given way to something harder and more shameful. The bitter knowledge that she had never learned to move like that, light and free, because Thomas had considered dancing a waste of time and an invitation to sin. Now, at 32, she watched 20-year-old Clara Bentley spin in her new husband's arms, and the humiliation burned hotter than any sorrow ever had. The fiddles struck up a two-step, and the whole room seemed to lift and sway in unison. Ophelia's fingers dug into the rough wood behind her. She had attended this wedding out of duty, because Clara's mother had been kind to her after Thomas died, bringing over casseroles and sitting in silence while Ophelia stared at the walls of the narrow house on the edge of Abilene. The town had grown up around the cattle trade, thriving when the Kishom Trail brought thousands of longhorns through every season. But now, in 1880, the railroads had shifted and the herds were dwindling. Abilene was learning to be quieter, and so was Ophelia, though she had never been loud to begin with. A woman in a blue dress caught her eye and smiled with pity. Ophelia looked away, heat crawling up her neck. Everyone knew she did not dance. Everyone knew Thomas Morgan had been a God-fearing man who read scripture every evening and considered music an extravagance. What they did not know, what Ophelia herself had only begun to understand in the long, empty evenings after his death, was that she had agreed to all of it without question, had married him at 18 because he was steady and respectable, and had spent 14 years forgetting that she had ever wanted anything else. The two-step ended and the couples broke apart, laughing and flushed. Clara's new husband kissed her hand and someone called for another round. Ophelia considered slipping out the back, but the door was on the far side of the room and she would have to cross the dance floor to reach it. She stayed where she was, her black dress severe among all the bright calico and Sunday silk, and wished she could disappear into the wall. "You look like you are holding up the building," a voice said beside her, low and amused. "Should I be worried about structural integrity?" Ophelia turned her head sharply. The man standing next to her was tall, with dark hair that curled slightly over his collar and eyes that caught the lamplight. She recognized him, though they had never spoken. Yates Jameson, who owned the Saloon on Texas Street. He was younger than she was, perhaps 28 or 29, and had a reputation for being charming and unserious, the kind of man who could talk a temperance preacher into buying a round. He was dressed well for a saloon keeper, in a clean shirt and a vest that looked like it had been brushed recently, and he was watching her with an expression that was not quite a smile. "The building is fine," Ophelia said, more sharply than she intended. "I am simply resting." "Resting," Yates repeated, "at a wedding while everyone else is dancing. Not everyone is dancing. You are not dancing." "Fair point." He leaned his shoulder against the wall next to her, crossing his arms. "Though in my case it is because I have been watching you for the past 20 minutes, trying to figure out why you look like you would rather be anywhere else." Ophelia's throat tightened. "That is none of your concern, Mr. Jameson. Call me Yates. And you are right, it is not." He paused, and when he spoke again his voice had lost its teasing edge. "But you looked like you might bolt, and I thought if someone was standing next to you, you would have to stay and be polite. Small town manners and all." She did not know what to say to that. The fiddles started up again, a waltz this time, and more couples joined the floor. Yates did not move, and neither did she. After a moment he said, "I knew your husband a little. He used to come by the saloon to tell me I was leading men astray. That sounds like Thomas." "He was not wrong," Yates said. "I do lead men astray. It is part of the business model. Despite herself, Ophelia felt her mouth twitch. She pressed her lips together, but Yates saw it and his expression warmed. "There," he said, "that is better." "What is?" "You looked a little less like you were carved out of limestone." He straightened, glancing toward the dance floor. "Do you want to dance, Mrs. Morgan?" The question was so unexpected that Ophelia laughed, a short, startled sound. "No, thank you, but no." "Why not?" "Because I do not dance." "You do not dance, or you do not know how?" The heat flooded back into her face worse than before. She looked away, fixing her gaze on the swirl of skirts and boots across the room. "It does not matter. The answer is the same." Yates was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If it helps, I am an excellent teacher." "It does not help. All right." He pushed off from the wall, and Ophelia thought he was leaving, but instead he just shifted his weight, watching the dancers. "Can I ask you something? You are going to anyway. Also fair." He tilted his head toward her. "Why did you come tonight, if you do not dance, and you clearly do not want to be here?" Ophelia hesitated. The honest answer felt too raw, too exposing, but something about the way he asked, as if he genuinely wanted to know, made her say, "Because Clara's mother was kind to me, and because I thought I should." People expect widows to show up and be respectable and then disappear quietly into the background. I am very good at being respectable. I can see that. Yates was quiet for another beat. Then he said, "For what it is worth, I think respectable is overrated. You would." "I would," he agreed, and this time he did smile. "But I mean it. You do not owe anyone your attendance at a dance you do not enjoy, Mrs. Morgan, not even Clara's mother." "Ophelia," she said before she could stop herself. "My name is Ophelia, Ophelia." He said it carefully, as if testing the weight of it. "That is a serious name. I am a serious person." "I do not believe that," Yates said. "I think you have been told you are a serious person for so long that you started to believe it yourself. But I saw you almost smile a minute ago, and it did not look serious at all." Ophelia turned to face him fully, ready to tell him he was wrong, but the words caught when she saw his expression. He was not teasing anymore. He looked thoughtful and something else, something that made her pulse quicken in a way she did not understand. "Why are you talking to me?" she asked quietly. Yates met her eyes. "Because you looked like you needed someone to talk to, and because I wanted to." The waltz ended and the fiddlers took a break. People began moving toward the tables where food was laid out, and the press of bodies near the wall thinned. Yates glanced toward the door and then back at Ophelia. "I should let you go," he said. "But if you ever decide you want to learn that two-step, you know where to find me. I am not going to walk into a saloon, Mr. Jameson." "Yates," he corrected, "and I did not say you had to come during business hours." Before Ophelia could answer, he tipped his head in a polite nod and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. She watched him go, her heart beating too fast, and realized she was still pressed against the wall as if it were the only thing holding her up. She left the wedding shortly after, slipping out while everyone was distracted by the cake cutting. The September night was cool, the air carrying the faint smell of dust and wood smoke. Ophelia walked slowly back to her house, her heels clicking on the dry street, and tried not to think about the way Yates Jameson had looked at her, as if she were a puzzle he wanted to solve. The house was dark when she arrived. She lit a lamp in the parlor and sat down in the chair by the window, still wearing her black dress. The silence pressed in around her, familiar and suffocating. She thought about Clara dancing with her new husband, about the way the girl's face had glowed with happiness, and felt the old bitterness rise up again. It was not that she begrudged Clara her joy. It was that Ophelia could not remember ever feeling that way herself, not even on her own wedding day. Thomas had been dutiful, and she had been obedient, and neither of them had ever questioned whether that was enough. She sat there for a long time, watching the shadows shift across the walls, and wondered what it would be like to walk into a saloon after hours and ask a man to teach her something frivolous and unnecessary. The thought made her stomach twist with equal parts fear and longing, and she pushed it away, telling herself it was foolish. Respectable widows did not chase after saloon keepers, no matter how kind their eyes were, but the thought did not leave. It stayed with her through the night and into the following days, a quiet, persistent hum beneath the surface of her routine. Ophelia kept house for herself, took in sewing to make ends meet, and attended church on Sundays, always sitting in the back pew where Thomas had insisted they belong. She spoke to her neighbors in passing and smiled when it was expected, and all the while she felt as if she were watching herself from a distance, a woman going through the motions of a life that did not quite fit. A week after the wedding, she walked past the saloon on her way to the general store. It was mid-morning and the doors were closed, the windows dark. She paused, glancing at the sign above the door, and then kept walking, her heart pounding for no reason at all. 2 days later, she did it again. This time she stopped for a moment longer, looking at the building as if it might tell her something. It was a simple structure, 2 stories with a false front, painted red with white trim that needed touching up. She had passed it 100 times and never really looked at it. Now she noticed the way the morning light caught the windows, the neat stack of crates by the side door, the faint sound of someone moving around inside. She turned away quickly, afraid someone would see her standing there, and hurried on. The third time, Yates was outside, sweeping the boardwalk in front of the saloon. He looked up as she approached and his face brightened with recognition. "Ophelia," he said, as if they were old friends. "Good morning." She stopped, clutching her basket in front of her like a shield. "Good morning, Mr. Jameson." "Yates," he reminded her. He leaned the broom against the wall and stepped down onto the street, closing the distance between them. "Are you headed somewhere or just taking in the sights?" "The general store," Ophelia said too quickly. "I need thread." "Thread?" He nodded, serious. "Essential. It is for my work. I take in sewing." "I know. Mrs. Henderson mentioned it when she was mending a tear in one of my shirts. She said you do beautiful work." Ophelia blinked, surprised. She did. Yates studied her for a moment, then said, "Have you thought about what I said? About the 2-step? "No," Ophelia lied. "All right." He did not look convinced, but he did not push. Instead he said, "If you change your mind, I am usually here in the evenings. Not during business hours, obviously. But after I close, I am around. The saloon is quiet then, good for practicing. I have not changed my mind." "Noted." He smiled at her, and it was not a mocking smile, just warm and a little hopeful. "But the offer stands." Ophelia nodded stiffly and walked past him, her face burning. She could feel him watching her as she went, and she forced herself not to look back. When she reached the general store, she stood inside the door for a moment, her hands shaking slightly, before she could make herself move toward the counter. That evening, she sat in her parlor with a piece of mending in her lap, but her hands were still. The lamp flickered beside her, casting restless shadows, and outside the window the town was settling into its usual nighttime quiet. Abilene was not the wild place it had been in the early days of the cattle drives. There were still saloons and dance halls, still the occasional cowboy looking for trouble, but the violence had faded, and what was left was something more ordinary. Ophelia had always found comfort in that ordinariness, in the predictability of her days. Now it felt like a cage. She set the mending aside and stood, pacing to the window. Down the street she could see the lights of the saloon, bright against the dark. She imagined Yates inside, pouring drinks and laughing with customers, and wondered if he had meant what he said. The offer stands. As if teaching a widow to dance were the most natural thing in the world, the idea was absurd. Ophelia knew that. She also knew that if she did not at least try, she would spend the rest of her life standing against walls, watching other people live. She made her decision quickly, before she could change her mind. She took off her apron, smoothed her hair, and pulled her shawl around her shoulders. Then she walked out into the night, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might be sick. The saloon was loud when she reached it, full of voices and the clink of glasses. Ophelia stood across the street, hidden in the shadows, and watched through the windows. She could see Yates behind the bar, talking to a man in a dusty coat. He looked easy and relaxed, completely in his element, and Ophelia felt her courage waver. What was she thinking, coming here? She did not belong in a place like this. She was about to turn back when Yates glanced toward the window and saw her. Their eyes met across the street, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Yates said something to the man at the bar and came outside, wiping his hands on a towel. "Ophelia," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet street. "Is everything all right?" She crossed to him slowly, aware of the eyes watching from inside the saloon. "I should not have come," she said. "I am sorry." "Why are you sorry? Because this is ridiculous." "I am a widow. I should not be standing outside a saloon at night asking a stranger to teach me to dance." Yates was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "First, I am not a stranger. We have had at least 3 conversations, which I think qualifies us as acquaintances. Second, you are a widow, not a nun. You are allowed to do things just because you want to. And third, you did not actually ask me to teach you, but I am hoping that is why you are here." Ophelia wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the shawl. "I do not know why I am here." "That is all right." Yates glanced back at the saloon, then at her. "Can you wait about an hour? I need to close up, but after that we will have the place to ourselves. No one watching, no one judging, just you and me and a lot of empty floor space." "An hour," Ophelia repeated, "give or take. There is a bench around the side if you want to sit, or you can go home and come back, whatever makes you comfortable." She should have gone home. That was the sensible thing to do, but instead she said, "I will wait." Yates's smile was slow and genuine. "Good," he said. "I will make it quick." He went back inside, and Ophelia walked around to the side of the building where a narrow bench sat against the wall. She sat down, pulling her shawl tighter, and listened to the muffled sounds from inside the saloon. Gradually the noise died down as customers left, and the lights in the windows dimmed one by one. Ophelia sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, and tried to quiet the voice in her head that told her she was being foolish. Finally, the side door opened and Yates stepped out, carrying a lamp. "Sorry that took longer than I thought," he said. "A couple of regulars wanted to debate the merits of whiskey versus brandy, and it turned into a whole philosophical discussion. Come on in." Ophelia stood, her legs stiff from sitting, and followed him inside. The saloon was dim and quiet now, the tables cleared and the chairs pushed back. It smelled like smoke and spilled beer, not unpleasant but foreign. Yates set the lamp on the bar and turned to face her. "Welcome to my kingdom," he said with a slight bow. "It is not much, but it is mine." Ophelia looked around, taking in the scuffed floor and the paintings on the walls, the long mirror behind the bar that reflected the lamplight. "How long have you owned this place?" she asked. 3 years. I bought it from a man who wanted to move to California and try his luck in the gold fields. It was a good deal for me, though I suspect he got the better end of it. Abilene is not what it used to be." "No," Ophelia agreed. "It is not." Yates moved to the center of the room, pushing a few chairs out of the way to clear more space. "All right," he said. "Before we start, I need to know what you do know. Can you keep time to music?" "I think so. I am not sure. Can you count to 4? Of course I can count to 4. Then you are already halfway there. He held out his hand. Come here. Ophelia hesitated, then crossed the room to stand in front of him. Up close, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw. He smelled like soap and wood smoke, clean and warm, and she felt suddenly, acutely aware of how long it had been since she had stood this close to anyone. The 2-step is simple, Yates said, his voice matter of fact. It is just a pattern. Quick, quick, slow, slow. 2 fast steps and 2 slow steps, over and over. The trick is to relax and let the music carry you. I do not know how to relax, Ophelia admitted. I noticed, he smiled. But that is all right, we will work on it. He took her right hand and placed it on his shoulder, then took her left hand in his. I am going to lead, which means you just have to follow. Do not think about it too much. Just feel where I am going and come with me. Ophelia's hand felt stiff and awkward on his shoulder. There is no music, she said. We do not need music yet. First we need to get the steps down. He began to move, counting softly under his breath. Quick, quick, slow, slow. Quick, quick, slow, slow. Ophelia tried to follow, but her feet tangled and she stumbled. Yates caught her easily, his grip firm, and waited for her to steady herself. Sorry, she muttered. Do not be. Try again. They started over, and this time Ophelia managed a few steps before she lost the rhythm. Yates was patient, counting aloud and adjusting his pace to match hers. After several tries, she began to feel the pattern, the way the quick steps pushed forward and the slow steps let her catch up. It was not graceful, but it was something. Better, Yates said. You are getting it. I am stepping on your feet. I have tough feet. Keep going. They practiced for what felt like a long time, moving slowly around the empty saloon. Ophelia's legs ached, and her face was hot with concentration, but gradually the steps began to feel less foreign. Yates kept up a steady stream of encouragement, correcting her gently when she veered off course, and slowly, tentatively, she began to trust that he would not let her fall. Finally, Yates stopped and released her hand, stepping back. That is enough for tonight, he said. You did well. Ophelia felt a strange pang of disappointment. I was terrible. You were a beginner. There is a difference. He walked over to the bar and poured 2 glasses of water from a pitcher, handing one to her. Drink this. You look like you are about to keel over. She took the glass and drank, suddenly aware of how thirsty she was. Yates leaned against the bar, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. Why are you doing this? Ophelia asked. Doing what? This, helping me. You do not owe me anything. Yates considered the question, turning his own glass in his hands. Honestly, I am not sure. I saw you at that wedding and you looked so miserable, and I just thought someone should do something about it. And then you walked up tonight and I realized I wanted it to be me. Why? Because I like you, he said simply. I do not know you very well yet, but I like what I have seen. You are braver than you think you are. Ophelia looked down at her glass, her throat tight. I do not feel brave. Brave people never do. That is part of what makes them brave. He finished his water and set the glass aside. Come back tomorrow night if you want. Same time, we will keep working on it. Tomorrow, or the next night, or whenever you are ready. There is no rush, but I think you should keep going. I think you have more dancing in you than you know. Ophelia nodded slowly, not trusting herself to speak. She set her glass on the bar and pulled her shawl around her shoulders, suddenly aware of how late it was. I should go, she said. I will walk you. You do not have to, I know, but I am going to anyway. They stepped out into the cool night air, and Yates locked the door behind them. The town was quiet now, most of the buildings dark. They walked side by side, not touching, and Ophelia found herself hyper-aware of the space between them, the way their footsteps matched without either of them trying. When they reached her house, Yates stopped at the gate. Thank you for coming tonight, he said. "I know it was not easy. Thank you for teaching me." He tipped his hat. "Sleep well, Ophelia." She watched him walk away, a tall figure disappearing into the shadows, and then went inside, closing the door softly behind her. The house felt different somehow, less oppressive, as if letting in a little bit of the outside world had shifted something in the walls. Ophelia went to her bedroom and undressed slowly, her body tired in a way that felt good, earned. She climbed into bed and lay in the dark, thinking about the feel of Yates's hand in hers, the steady rhythm of his counting, the way he had looked at her as if she were someone worth knowing. She went back the next night, and the night after that. Each time, Yates closed the saloon and they spent an hour or more working on the two-step, moving around the empty room while he counted and corrected and encouraged. Ophelia was clumsy at first, self-conscious and stiff, but slowly she began to relax. Yates was a good teacher, patient and kind, and he had a way of making her feel as if her mistakes were not failures, just part of the process. On the fourth night, he brought a fiddle out from behind the bar. "One of my regulars left this here years ago," he said. "I have been holding on to it in case he comes back, but I think he has moved on. Do you mind if I play?" Ophelia stared at him. "You play the fiddle, not well, but well enough." He tucked the instrument under his chin and drew the bow across the strings, producing a clear, sweet note. "Let us see if you can dance to real music." He played a simple tune, something slow and repetitive, and Ophelia found that the music did help. It gave her something to follow, a thread to hold onto, and the steps came more easily than they had before. Yates watched her over the top of the fiddle, his eyes warm, and Ophelia felt something inside her begin to loosen, some tight knot of fear and shame that had been there so long she had stopped noticing it. "You are smiling," Yates said when the tune ended. Ophelia touched her face, surprised. "I suppose I am." "Good. You should do it more often." They kept practicing, and as the weeks passed, Ophelia found herself looking forward to those evenings in the saloon more than anything else. It was not just the dancing, though she was getting better at that. It was the way Yates talked to her, asking questions about her life and listening to the answers as if they mattered. He told her about himself too, in bits and pieces. He had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 4 brothers, and had come west looking for adventure after his father died. He had worked as a ranch hand, a stage coach driver, and a dozen other things before settling in Abilene and buying the saloon. He had never been married, though he had come close once. "What happened?" Ophelia asked one night, when they were taking a break and sitting at one of the tables. "She decided she wanted someone more respectable," Yates said with a shrug. "Someone who did not spend his nights serving whiskey to cowboys. I could not blame her. It is not an easy life." "Do you ever regret it, not going after her?" "No," Yates said. "I regret that I did not see sooner that we wanted different things, but I do not regret letting her go. She is happy now, I think. Married to a banker in St. Louis, and I am happy here." "Are you?" Ophelia asked. "Happy?" Yates looked at her and his expression was serious. "Most of the time." More so lately. Ophelia felt her face warm and looked away. "Because business is good, sure," Yates said. "Let us go with that." On a cold evening in late October, Yates taught her how to spin. It was a simple move, just a matter of him lifting their joined hands and Ophelia turning beneath his arm, but it felt impossibly complicated. She stumbled through it the first few times, dizzy and off balance, but Yates was patient, guiding her through the motion until she began to understand the rhythm of it. "Now try it with the music," he said, picking up the fiddle. He played a faster tune this time, something lively and bright, and Ophelia moved through the steps, her skirt swirling around her ankles. When Yates signaled the spin, she turned beneath his arm, and for a moment the room seemed to blur and lift, and she laughed, breathless and surprised. "There," Yates said, lowering the fiddle, "that is what I have been waiting for." "What?" "That laugh, that joy. You have been holding it back this whole time, and now it is finally coming out." Ophelia pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart race. "It is terrifying," she admitted. "I know," Yates said, "but it is also wonderful, is it not?" She nodded, unable to speak. Yates set the fiddle aside and crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Ophelia," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Her stomach twisted with sudden fear. "What is it?" "I have been teaching you the two-step for over a month now," Yates said, "and you have gotten good at it, but there is something I have not told you and I think you should know." "What?" He hesitated, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. "This dance, the two-step. It is the dance I always imagined doing at my own wedding. I used to think about it when I was younger, the kind of life I wanted, the kind of woman I would marry. And I always pictured us dancing this dance together, just like this." Ophelia's breath caught. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I need you to know that this is not just about teaching you a skill," Yates said. "It is personal for me. It has been from the start, and I did not want you to think I was hiding that from you." "I do not understand," Ophelia said, though part of her did, part of her had known for weeks. "I am falling in love with you," Yates said. "I have been falling in love with you since the night you stood outside my saloon, looking scared and determined, and I just thought you should know that before we keep doing this." Ophelia pulled her hands back, pressing them to her mouth. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. "You should not," she said, her voice shaking. "You should not love me. I am not, I cannot. I am just a widow who could not dance, and you are young and charming, and you could have anyone." "I do not want anyone," Yates said. "I want you. You do not know me. I think I do. I think I know you better than you know yourself." Ophelia shook her head, backing toward the door. "I need to go." "Wait, Ophelia, please." But she was already moving, grabbing her shawl and fleeing into the night. The cold air hit her like a slap, and she ran, her skirts tangling around her legs, until she reached her house and stumbled inside. She slammed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard, and felt the tears start, hot and stinging and furious. She cried for a long time, for reasons she could not quite name. She cried for the girl she had been at 18, who had married a man she did not love because it was expected. She cried for the 14 years she had spent being dutiful and obedient, never questioning whether there was more to life than scripture readings and silent meals. She cried for Thomas, who had never been cruel, just cold, and who had died without ever really knowing her. And she cried for herself, for the woman she was now, standing on the edge of something terrifying and wonderful, and not knowing how to take the next step. When the tears finally stopped, Ophelia washed her face and sat down at the kitchen table. The house was silent around her, and she felt the weight of it, the loneliness she had been carrying for so long. She thought about Yates, about the way he looked at her, the way he made her feel seen and valued. She thought about the two-step, about the way her body had started to remember how to move, how to feel light. And she thought about what he had said. "I am falling in love with you." No one had ever said that to her before. Thomas had proposed to her in the parlor of her parents' house, had told her she would make a suitable wife, and she had accepted because she did not know she was allowed to want more. But Yates had not offered her suitability. He had offered her love, freely and without expectation, and she did not know how to accept it. She did not go back to the saloon the next night or the night after that. She stayed in her house, taking in sewing and avoiding the streets where she might run into Yates. But the loneliness was worse now, sharper, because she knew what she was missing. She lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, and wondered if she was brave enough to reach for what she wanted. On the third night, there was a knock at her door. Ophelia opened it to find Yates standing on her porch, hat in hand, looking uncertain and hopeful. "I am sorry," he said before she could speak. "I should not have said what I said. I pushed too hard and I scared you, and I am sorry." "You did not scare me," Ophelia said quietly. "Or rather, you did, but not because of anything you did wrong. You scared me because you made me realize how much I want something I have spent my whole life believing I did not deserve." Yates took a step closer. "What do you want, Ophelia?" She looked at him, at the kindness in his eyes, the way he stood there waiting for her answer as if it were the most important thing in the world. And she thought about the two-step, about the way it felt to spin beneath his arm, light and free. She thought about the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming, and she made her choice. "I want to dance with you," she said, "and I want to stop being afraid of being happy." Yates's face broke into a smile, wide and unguarded. "Then come dance with me. Now, right now." "I closed the saloon early. It is just sitting there, empty and waiting for us." Ophelia hesitated for only a moment. Then she grabbed her shawl and followed him out into the night. They walked through the quiet streets, side by side, and when they reached the saloon, Yates unlocked the door and led her inside. He lit a lamp and picked up the fiddle, and without a word, he began to play. Ophelia moved to the center of the room and held out her hand. Yates set the fiddle aside and took it, pulling her close. They began to dance, the two-step coming easily now, natural as breathing. Ophelia felt the music move through her, felt the warmth of Yates's hand on her back, and she let herself relax into it, into the rhythm and the closeness and the joy. "I have never felt like this before," she said softly. "Like what?" "Light, free, like I am allowed to take up space in the world." Yates spun her gently, and she turned beneath his arm, her skirt flaring out. When she came back to him, he pulled her a little closer. "You are allowed," he said. "You have always been allowed. You just needed someone to remind you." They danced until Ophelia's legs ached and her breath came short, and then they danced a little longer, because neither of them wanted to stop. When they finally did, they stood together in the lamplight, still holding hands, and Yates said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "What do you want, Ophelia? Not just tonight, but in general. What do you want your life to look like?" Ophelia thought about it, and the answer came more easily than she expected. "I want to wake up in the morning and not feel like I am carrying a weight. I want to laugh without feeling guilty about it. I want to dance whenever I feel like it. And I want to spend time with someone who sees me as more than just a respectable widow." "I can give you that," Yates said, "or at least I would like to try." "I know," Ophelia said. "That is what scares me. I spent so long being what other people expected me to be that I do not know how to just be myself. Then we will figure it out together." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes sting. "You do not have to have it all figured out right now, Ophelia. You just have to be willing to try." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I am willing." "Good," Yates said. "That is all I need to hear." They began to see each other openly after that, and the town took notice. Ophelia had expected judgment, whispers about the widow who was stepping out with a saloon keeper, but what she got instead was a mixture of curiosity and quiet approval. Mrs. Henderson stopped her on the street one day and said, "It is good to see you looking happy, dear. Thomas would not have wanted you to spend the rest of your life alone." Ophelia was not sure that was true, but she thanked the woman anyway. The truth was, she had stopped worrying so much about what Thomas would have wanted. He was gone, and she was still here, and she had a right to make her own choices. Yates courted her the way a man of his generation courted a woman he respected. He took her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, walked with her on Sunday afternoons, and sat with her in the parlor of her house, talking until the lamp burned low. He was careful never to push, never to ask for more than she was ready to give. And Ophelia found herself falling for him slowly, steadily, like a river carving its way through stone. They still danced in the saloon after hours, but now it felt different. It was not just about learning the steps anymore. It was about being close, about the unspoken conversation that happened in the way they moved together. Yates told her more about his imagined wedding, the one he had dreamed of as a younger man. He had pictured a small ceremony, just close friends and family, and a dance afterward where he and his bride would two-step together while everyone watched. "It sounds lovely," Ophelia said one night as they swayed to a slow tune. "It does it not?" Yates said. "I used to think about it all the time, and then I met you and I realized I had been waiting for the right person to share it with." Ophelia's heart clenched. "Yates, I am not asking you to marry me," he said quickly. "Not yet, anyway. I just wanted you to know that when I think about that dance, I see you. I have seen you since the first night you walked into this saloon." Ophelia rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I see you too," she said. "I see you, and it terrifies me, and it is also the best thing that has ever happened to me." But the town's expectations weighed on her more than she wanted to admit. People smiled at her and Yates when they saw them together, but Ophelia could feel the unspoken questions, the assumption that a respectable widow would eventually remarry and settle back into the role she was supposed to play. Mrs. Caldwell, the pastor's wife, cornered her after church one Sunday and said, "It is so nice to see you happy, dear. I am sure Thomas would be pleased to know you have found someone to take care of you." Ophelia smiled tightly and excused herself, but the words stuck with her. "Take care of you." As if she were a burden that needed managing, as if her value lay only in her ability to be someone's responsibility. She brought it up with Yates that evening as they sat together on the porch of her house. "Do you think people expect us to get married?" she asked. "Probably," Yates said. "That is what people do when they are courting, is it not? They get married. And is that what you want?" Yates turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I want whatever makes you happy, Ophelia. If that is marriage, then yes, I want to marry you. If it is something else, then we will figure that out. But I need you to know that I am not courting you because I think you need taking care of. I am courting you because I love you and I want to spend my life with you, whatever that looks like." Ophelia felt the tightness in her chest ease a little. "I think I want to marry you," she said. "But I am afraid that if I do, I will just become someone's wife again, and I will lose myself the way I did before." "Then we will make sure that does not happen," Yates said. "You will not be just my wife, Ophelia. You will be you and I will be me, and we will build something together that is ours. No one else's expectations, no one else's rules, just ours." Ophelia reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You make it sound so simple." "It is not simple," Yates admitted, "but it is worth fighting for." As autumn turned to winter, the town prepared for the Christmas social, a yearly event held in the community hall. It was the biggest gathering of the year, and everyone in Abilene attended. Ophelia had not been to one since Thomas died, but Yates asked her to go with him, and she agreed. The night of the social, Ophelia dressed carefully in a green dress she had made herself, one that was not black for the first time in 3 years. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her face looked softer, younger, and her eyes were bright in a way they had not been in years. Yates came to collect her, dressed in his best suit, and his eyes widened when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said. "I feel strange," Ophelia admitted. "Everyone is going to stare." "Let them stare," Yates said. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." The community hall was decorated with pine boughs and candles, and the air was warm and smelled like cider and gingerbread. People greeted them as they entered, and Ophelia felt the weight of their gazes, but Yates kept his hand at the small of her back, steady and reassuring. The dancing started after dinner, and the fiddlers struck up a lively tune. Couples moved onto the floor, and Yates turned to Ophelia. "Ready?" he asked. She hesitated, looking around at the crowd. "Everyone will watch." "I know," Yates said, "but I do not care, and I do not think you should either. You have spent enough time worrying about what people think. Tonight, just dance with me." Ophelia took a deep breath and nodded. Yates led her onto the floor, and the moment they began to move, the rest of the room seemed to fade away. The two-step came easily now, as natural as breathing, and Ophelia let herself be carried by the music and the warmth of Yates's hand in hers. When he spun her, she laughed, the sound bright and free, and did not care who heard. They danced through several songs, and gradually Ophelia became aware of the other couples making space for them, of the way people were watching with smiles rather than judgment. When the fiddlers took a break, Mrs. Henderson came over and said, "That was lovely, dear. You have become quite the dancer." "Thank you," Ophelia said, still breathless. "You look happy," the older woman added. "It is good to see." As the evening wore on, Ophelia found herself relaxing into the celebration. She talked with neighbors she had been avoiding for years, accepted compliments on her dancing, and stood beside Yates without feeling the need to apologize for it. When the final dance of the night was announced, Yates took her hand and led her back onto the floor. "This has been the best night of my life," Ophelia said as they swayed to a slow waltz. "Mine too," Yates said, "but I have a feeling there are going to be a lot more nights like this." "I hope so, Ophelia," Yates said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up. "I know I said I was not going to ask yet, but I have been thinking about it all night and I do not want to wait any more. Will you marry me?" Ophelia stopped moving, her heart hammering. The room seemed to fall silent, though she knew the music was still playing. "Yates," she whispered. "You do not have to answer right now," he said quickly. "I just needed to ask. I needed you to know that I want this, that I want you, and that I am ready whenever you are." Ophelia looked at him, at the man who had taught her to dance, who had seen her at her most vulnerable and loved her anyway. She thought about the life she had lived before, the one that had been all duty and no joy, and she thought about the life she could have now, one built on love and partnership and the freedom to be herself. And she realized that the answer was not something she needed to think about. It was something she had known for a long time, buried deep beneath the fear and the shame. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." Yates's face lit up with joy, and he pulled her close, spinning her around in a move that was not part of any dance but felt perfect anyway. The other couples on the floor stopped to watch, and someone started clapping, and then the whole room was applauding, and Ophelia found herself laughing and crying at the same time, held safe in Yates's arms. They were married in the spring, a small ceremony in the church with only a handful of guests. Ophelia wore a simple ivory dress and carried wildflowers, and Yates stood at the front of the church looking nervous and happy and more handsome than she had ever seen him. The pastor, who had known Thomas and had officiated at Ophelia's first wedding, spoke about new beginnings and the grace of second chances, and Ophelia held Yates's hand and felt as if she were finally, truly starting her life. After the ceremony, they walked to the saloon, which Yates had closed for the day. He had cleared out the tables and set up a small gathering for their friends, with food and drink and the fiddle players from the Christmas social. When everyone had eaten and toasted the new couple, Yates stood and held out his hand to Ophelia. "There is one more thing we need to do," he said. Ophelia took his hand, and he led her to the center of the room. The fiddlers began to play, a familiar tune, and Yates pulled her into the two-step. They danced together, the dance he had imagined for his wedding, the dance he had taught her in this very room months ago when she was still learning how to be brave. And as they moved, Ophelia felt the weight of the past finally lift, felt herself become something new and whole and entirely her own. Around them, their friends clapped and cheered, but Ophelia barely heard them. She was focused on Yates, on the way he looked at her as if she were the only person in the world, on the way her body moved in perfect rhythm with his. This was her wedding dance, and it was everything she had never known she wanted. When the music ended, Yates dipped her low and the room erupted in applause. He pulled her back up and kissed her, soft and sure, and Ophelia kissed him back, unashamed and unafraid. They stayed in Abilene after the wedding, and Ophelia moved into the rooms above the saloon where Yates lived. It was strange at first, living in the same building as the business, hearing the noise from downstairs in the evenings, but Ophelia found she liked it. She liked being part of Yates's world, liked the way the regulars greeted her when she came down to bring Yates his dinner, liked the sense of community that came from being at the center of things. She kept taking in sewing, not because she needed the money, but because she enjoyed the work and it gave her something that was hers. Yates encouraged her, setting up a corner of their sitting room as her workroom, and never complained when she stayed up late finishing a project. They settled into a rhythm, a partnership that felt easy and right. Yates ran the saloon and Ophelia managed their home, but they made decisions together, talked about everything, and never let the silences stretch too long. On quiet evenings, Yates would take out the fiddle and play, and Ophelia would dance by herself, or they would dance together, just for the joy of it. The town accepted their marriage without much fuss. There were a few raised eyebrows, a few comments about the widow remarrying so quickly, but most people were kind. Mrs. Henderson told Ophelia she had made a good choice, and even Mrs. Caldwell, the pastor's wife, softened her disapproval when she saw how happy Ophelia was. But there were still moments when Ophelia felt the old guilt creeping in, the sense that she was taking up too much space, asking for too much. One evening, as she and Yates sat together after closing, she said, "Do you ever think people judge us? Judge me?" Yates looked up from the ledger he was working on. "Probably. People always judge. Why do you ask?" "I just wonder sometimes if I am doing the right thing, if I am being selfish." "Selfish how? For remarrying? For being happy? For dancing?" She laughed a little, but it was a bitter sound. Thomas would have said all of this is frivolous. Yates set down his pen and came over to sit beside her. "Thomas was wrong," he said simply. "And you are not being selfish. You are being human. You are allowed to want things, Ophelia. You are allowed to be happy. And anyone who tells you otherwise does not have your best interests at heart. I know that, I do, but it is hard to shake the feeling that I am supposed to be someone different." "You are supposed to be you," Yates said. "That is all, just you, exactly as you are. And I love you exactly as you are." Ophelia leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar warmth of him, the steadiness that had become her anchor. "I love you too," she said. "I do not think I have said that enough. You can say it as much as you want. I will never get tired of hearing it." They sat together in the quiet, and Ophelia felt the guilt begin to ease. It would never disappear entirely, she knew that. The years with Thomas had left their mark, and she would carry that for the rest of her life. But Yates made it easier to carry, made it lighter, and she was grateful for that. As the months passed, people began to suggest that Ophelia and Yates should start a family. It was a common enough assumption that a newly married couple would want children, and Ophelia found herself fielding questions about it more often than she would have liked. Mrs. Henderson asked outright one day in the middle of a conversation about nothing in particular, "So when can we expect to hear the patter of little feet?" Ophelia forced a smile. I am not sure. We have not really talked about it. Well, you should, the older woman said. You are not getting any younger, dear. That night, Ophelia brought it up with Yates. They were lying in bed, the room dark except for the faint glow of the street lamp outside. People keep asking me when we are going to have children, she said. Yates turned his head to look at her. What do you tell them? That we have not talked about it, but the truth is, I do not know if I want children. That is all right, Yates said. Is it? Ophelia asked. Do you want children? Yates was quiet for a moment, thinking. I always thought I would have them, he said finally. When I pictured my life, I pictured a family. But that was before I met you, and now I am not sure it matters. I am happy with just us. If you want children, then we will have them. If you do not, then we will not. Either way, I have everything I need. Ophelia felt a rush of relief so strong it made her eyes sting. Are you sure? I am sure. He reached over and took her hand. You do not have to be a mother to be complete, Ophelia. You do not have to be anything other than what you are, and what you are is enough, more than enough. I spent so many years being what Thomas wanted, Ophelia said quietly. I do not want to spend the rest of my life being what everyone else thinks I should be. Then do not, Yates said. Live the life you want to live. We will figure out the rest as we go. They decided together, after more conversations and some soul-searching, that they would not have children. It was not a decision they made lightly, but it was one that felt right for both of them. Ophelia did not want to be a mother, did not want to shape her life around the needs of children, and Yates supported her fully. When people asked, as they inevitably did, Ophelia learned to say simply, We have chosen not to have children, and to let the awkward silence that followed be someone else's problem. Life continued, full and busy and good. The saloon did well, and Yates hired a young man to help him run it so that he and Ophelia could have more time together. They took trips to nearby towns, visited friends, and spent long evenings talking and dancing and just being together. Ophelia learned to play the fiddle a little, enough to accompany Yates when he wanted to dance, and he learned to sew well enough to mend his own shirts, though he always claimed Ophelia's work was better. They celebrated their first anniversary quietly, with dinner at the hotel and a dance in the saloon afterward. Yates had invited a few friends, and the evening turned into a small party that lasted well into the night. Ophelia danced until her feet ached, and when the last guest had left and she and Yates were alone, she said, This has been the happiest year of my life. Mine too, Yates said, and I think the next one will be even better. Why do you think that? Because we are just getting started, he said. We have our whole lives ahead of us, and I plan to make every year better than the last. Ophelia laughed and kissed him, and they danced one more time, just the two of them in the empty saloon, moving to the sound of Yates humming the tune. It was not perfect or graceful, but it was theirs, and that was enough. As the years went by, Ophelia and Yates became fixtures in Abilene, known and respected in their own way. The saloon remained successful, and Ophelia's sewing business grew as well. She took on more complicated projects, making dresses for weddings and special occasions, and her reputation spread beyond the town. People came from miles around to commission work from her, and she took pride in the skills she had developed. But the best part of her life, the part she treasured most, was the time she spent with Yates. They made a point of closing the saloon one night a week, just so they could have an evening to themselves. Sometimes they danced, sometimes they sat and talked, and sometimes they just enjoyed the quiet companionship of being together. Yates continued to play the fiddle, and Ophelia continued to improve, and the music became a thread that wove through their lives, tying them together. One evening, several years into their marriage, they were dancing when Yates suddenly stopped and said, "Do you remember the first night I taught you the two-step?" "Of course," Ophelia said. "I was terrified." "You were brave," Yates corrected. "And I knew even then that I was going to fall in love with you." "Did you?" "I did." He smiled at her, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I saw you standing there, determined to learn something just because you wanted to, and I thought, that is the kind of woman I want to spend my life with. Someone who is not afraid to reach for what she wants, even when it scares her." Ophelia felt her throat tighten. "I am still scared sometimes. I still worry that I am doing it wrong, that I am asking for too much." "You are not," Yates said firmly. "You are asking for exactly what you deserve, which is everything. And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you get it." He pulled her close, and they began to dance again, the two-step that had brought them together, the rhythm as familiar now as their own heartbeats. Ophelia rested her head against his chest and let the music carry her. Let herself be held and loved and completely, utterly herself. Outside, the town of Abilene settled into the quiet of evening, the streets empty and the sky darkening overhead. But inside the saloon, the lamp burned bright, and the sound of the fiddle filled the air, and two people danced together, choosing joy over duty, love over expectation, and each other over everything else. They danced until the lamp burned low and their legs were tired, and then they went upstairs to their home, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. Because they had each other, and they had this life they had built together, and that was more than enough. Ophelia had spent so many years believing that happiness was something other people deserved, something she had forfeited when she married young and chose duty over desire. But Yates had shown her that it was never too late to reclaim what was hers, that she was allowed to dance and laugh and love without guilt or shame. And so she did. She lived the rest of her life fully and freely, dancing whenever she felt like it, loving the man who had taught her that joy was not frivolous but essential. She grew old with Yates, their lives entwined in a way that felt both effortless and deeply intentional, and when she looked back on her years, she did not think about the time she had lost with Thomas. She thought about the time she had gained with Yates, the moments of laughter and music and the simple, profound happiness of being seen and loved for exactly who she was. They never had children, and they never regretted it. Their life was full in other ways, rich with friendship and work, and the deep satisfaction of a partnership built on mutual respect and affection. They grew old together in Abilene, watching the town change around them, the cattle drives fading into memory, and the railroads bringing new people and new possibilities. But through it all, they remained constant, a fixture in the community, the saloon keeper and his wife who danced together every week and loved each other without reservation. On their 10th anniversary, Yates closed the saloon for the entire evening and threw a party. He invited everyone in town, and the community hall was packed with people who had come to celebrate the couple who had become a symbol of hope and second chances. There was food and drink and, of course, music, and when the fiddlers struck up a two-step, Yates took Ophelia's hand and led her onto the floor. They danced together, the way they had on their wedding day, the way they did every week in the saloon, and the room fell silent, everyone watching. Ophelia felt the eyes on her, but this time there was no shame, no fear. There was only pride and joy and the deep, abiding love she felt for the man who held her. When the dance ended, the room erupted in applause, and Yates dipped her low, just like he had on their wedding day. Ophelia laughed, breathless and happy, and when he pulled her back up, she kissed him in front of everyone, unashamed and unafraid. Later that night, when the guests had gone and they were alone in their home above the saloon, Ophelia said, "Thank you." "For what?" Yates asked. For teaching me to dance, for loving me, for showing me that it is never too late to choose happiness. You did that yourself, Yates said. I just helped a little. You did more than help, Ophelia said. You saved me. Then we saved each other, Yates said. Because I was just going through the motions before I met you. You gave me a reason to want more, to build something real and lasting. You gave me a life worth living. They held each other in the darkness, the sound of the town settling around them, and Ophelia felt a sense of peace so profound, it brought tears to her eyes. She had spent so many years believing that her life was over, that she had used up her chance at happiness. But Yates had shown her that there were always more chances, that it was never too late to start over, to reach for what you wanted and build a life that was true to yourself. As the years continued to pass, Ophelia and Yates remained deeply in love, their bond only growing stronger with time. They supported each other through the challenges that came with aging, through the inevitable changes that life brought, and through it all, they never stopped dancing. Even when their steps grew slower and their bodies less nimble, they still made time for the two-step, still moved together in the saloon after hours, still held each other and swayed to the music. Ophelia's sewing business continued to thrive, and she took on apprentices, teaching younger women the skills she had honed over the years. She loved passing on her knowledge, loved seeing other women find purpose and pride in their work. Yates eventually sold the saloon to his assistant, a young man who had worked for him for years, and who promised to keep the place running the way Yates had always intended. With the proceeds, Yates and Ophelia bought a small house on the edge of town, with a garden and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sunset. They filled their home with music and laughter, with friends who came to visit and stayed for hours, talking and sharing meals and enjoying the warmth of their hospitality. Ophelia planted flowers in the garden, bright blooms that reminded her of the wildflowers she had carried on her wedding day, and Yates built a small workshop where he could tinker with projects, fixing things for neighbors and crafting small gifts for Ophelia. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange and pink, Ophelia said, "I never imagined my life would turn out like this." "Like what?" Yates asked. "So full, so happy. When Thomas died, I thought that was it. I thought I would just live out the rest of my days quietly, doing my duty and waiting for the end. But then you came along and everything changed." "I am glad I did," Yates said. "I am glad you gave me a chance." "I am glad I gave myself a chance," Ophelia said. "That is what you really taught me, you know. Not just how to dance, but how to take a chance on myself, to believe that I deserved more than just survival." Yates reached over and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "You deserve everything, Ophelia. And I am grateful every day that I get to be the one to share it with you." They sat together in the fading light, comfortable in their silence, and Ophelia felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was the life she had chosen, the life she had fought for, and it was more than she had ever hoped for. She had learned to dance, not just the two-step but the dance of life itself, moving through the challenges and the joys with grace and courage. And she had done it with Yates by her side, her partner in every sense of the word. As the years went on, they continued to live fully, to embrace each moment and to never take their time together for granted. They traveled when they could, visiting new places and making new memories. They attended weddings and celebrations, always the first on the dance floor, their steps still sure and their love still evident to everyone who saw them. When Ophelia turned 50, Yates threw her a party, inviting all their friends and filling the house with flowers and music. He played the fiddle for her, the same tunes he had played when he first taught her to dance, and Ophelia danced with him, her heart full to bursting. Later, when the guests had left, Yates gave her a gift, a beautiful shawl he had commissioned from one of her former apprentices, embroidered with wildflowers and stitched with care. "It is beautiful," Ophelia said, wrapping it around her shoulders. "Thank you. You are beautiful," Yates said. "And I wanted you to have something that reminded you of how far you have come." Ophelia hugged him, holding him close. "I could not have done it without you." "Yes, you could have," Yates said, "but I am glad you did not have to." They continued to dance, continued to live, continued to love each other with a depth and intensity that never faded. And when people in town talked about them, which they often did, they spoke with admiration and a little bit of awe. Because Ophelia and Yates Jameson were proof that it was never too late to find happiness, that second chances were real, and that love, when it was true and deep and freely given, could transform a life. On their 20th anniversary, they returned to the Saloon, which was now run by someone else but still held so many memories for them. The new owner, a kind man who had known them for years, opened the place just for them, setting up a small celebration with a few close friends. The fiddlers played, and Ophelia and Yates danced the two-step in the same room where they had first fallen in love, and it felt like coming home. "You remember the night I taught you this dance?" Yates asked as they moved together. "Every detail," Ophelia said. "I was so nervous I thought I might be sick. You hit it well." "I do not think I did," Ophelia said, laughing, "but you were kind enough to pretend you did not notice." "I noticed," Yates said, "but I also noticed how brave you were, how determined, and I knew even then that you were special." "You made me feel special," Ophelia said. "You made me feel like I mattered, like my happiness mattered, and that changed everything." They danced until the music stopped, and then they stood together in the center of the room, holding each other, surrounded by the ghosts of their past and the promise of their future. It was a perfect moment, one that Ophelia would carry with her always, a reminder of the journey they had taken together and the life they had built. As they grew older, they began to slow down, to spend more time at home and less time out in the world. But their love did not slow. If anything, it deepened, becoming something richer and more profound. They talked for hours, reminiscing about the past and dreaming about the future, even though they both knew their time was growing shorter. They held hands while they walked, leaned on each other when they needed support, and never let a day go by without saying, "I love you." Ophelia's health began to decline first, a slow weakening that the doctor said was just part of aging. She accepted it with grace, refusing to let it steal her joy. Yates was by her side every step of the way, taking care of her with the same tenderness he had always shown, never complaining, never faltering. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Ophelia said, "I do not have any regrets." "Neither do I," Yates said. "I am glad," Ophelia said. "I am glad we found each other. I am glad we took that chance." "So am I," Yates said. "You gave me the best years of my life, Ophelia. I would not trade a single moment of it, not even the hard parts." "Not even the hard parts," Yates said, "because they were ours and we faced them together and that made them bearable." Ophelia smiled, her eyes shining. "You are a good man, Yates Jameson, the best man I have ever known. And you are the love of my life," Yates said. "Always have been, always will be." They sat together as the sun set, their hands intertwined, and Ophelia felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had lived a full life, a life rich with love and laughter and the simple joy of being herself. She had danced, she had loved, and she had been loved in return. And that was more than enough. Ophelia lived several more years, each one a gift. She and Yates continued their routines, dancing when they could, talking always, and holding each other through the long, quiet nights. When she finally passed, it was peacefully in her sleep, with Yates beside her. The town mourned her, remembering her as a woman who had transformed herself, who had chosen happiness over duty and love over expectation. They remembered the way she and Yates had danced together, the way they had loved each other so openly and so well. And they remembered the lesson she had taught them all, that it is never too late to reclaim your joy, to reach for what you want, and to live the life you were always meant to live. Yates grieved deeply, but he did not let the grief consume him. He kept the house, kept the garden, and kept the memories of their life together close. He played the fiddle in the evenings, the same tunes he had played for Ophelia, and sometimes he danced alone, moving through the two-step they had shared for so many years. He did not remarry. He did not want to. Ophelia had been his great love, his partner, his everything, and he was content to live the rest of his days with her memory. He told stories about her to anyone who would listen, keeping her alive in the hearts of the community. He talked about the night he first taught her to dance, about the way she had looked on their wedding day, about the life they had built together. And he made sure that everyone knew that Ophelia Morgan Jameson had been a woman of courage and grace, who had taken a chance on happiness, and had lived a life full of love and joy. When Yates eventually passed, several years later, the town buried him next to Ophelia in the small cemetery on the edge of Abilene. Their graves were simple, marked with stones that bore their names and the dates of their lives, but to those who knew them, those stones represented so much more. They represented a love story that had defied expectations, a partnership that had been built on mutual respect and deep affection, and a reminder that it is never too late to start over, to choose joy, and to dance. And so their story became part of the fabric of Abilene, a tale told by grandparents to grandchildren, a reminder that love can come at any age, that happiness is always worth reaching for, and that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to close a saloon, pick up a fiddle, and teach you the dance you were always meant to know. The widow who could not dance the two-step had learned, and in learning, she had found not just the steps, but herself, and a love that would last forever.